You know how people say that I'm the monster? I wish people could have met Thomas Ayers the way he was, the way he really was. Then people would know that he was the monster. The end of it in my mouth.
Case 1. The House on the Hill. Ashley Martinson, rural Wisconsin, March 2015. The call came mid-morning. A note had been left. Siblings were alone in the house, and somewhere inside, 2 people were dead. When Wisconsin investigators arrived at the Ayers family home, they found Jennifer Ayers and her husband Thomas, both shot, both stabbed, both gone. Their 17-year-old daughter Ashley had already fled the state. The younger children, left unharmed in a back bedroom, had dialed 911. What followed would become one of the most debated cases in Wisconsin in years, not just because of what happened, but because of why. Who was Ashley Martinson? Online, Ashley went by the name, quote, Vampiric. Her blog and social media profiles were filled with dark fiction, stories of survival, revenge, and violence, rendered in careful, almost literary detail. Some who read them saw an imaginative teenager processing difficult emotions. Others, in hindsight, saw something closer to a blueprint. In court, Ashley described her home life as a war zone. She accused her stepfather Thomas of sustained physical and psychological abuse, a household, she said, that offered no exits and no safety. Her mother Jennifer, she claimed, either couldn't or wouldn't intervene. Her defense team built their case around that narrative, a teenager cornered by years of documented trauma who believed she had no other way out. The morning of the attack, Ashley armed herself with a shotgun and a knife. Thomas Ayers was shot in the bathroom. Jennifer was shot and then stabbed multiple times with deliberate force. The attack left no ambiguity about intent. Afterward, Ashley gathered her belongings, left a note, and drove south toward Indiana. She was apprehended within days, still in possession of the weapon. The case for and against prosecutors were direct. Alternatives had existed. Ashley could have told a teacher, called a crisis line, left the house. She had access to a phone, to social media, to the outside world. Instead, she maintained a public blog, planned an escape route, and carried a note, all before the attack. The evidence of planning was hard to argue around. But for many observers, the case raised questions that a conviction alone couldn't resolve. What had been happening inside that house? What had the system missed? Were the options prosecutors described truly available to a teenager in her position? The jury did not have to answer those questions. Only the legal one. Verdict and aftermath. In 2016, Ashley Martinson pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree homicide and was sentenced to 23 years in a Wisconsin state prison. Her appeal was denied in 2019. She will not be eligible for release until at least 2038. In prison interviews, Martinson reportedly said she was happier inside than she had ever been at home. The statement unsettled many people, not because it was necessarily hard to believe, but because of what it implied about the life that preceded it. The truth of what happened inside the Ayers household may never be fully known. What is known is that 2 people are dead, 3 children's lives were permanently altered, and a community was left holding questions with no clean answers. If you're new here, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Truth and Evidence Crime Cases and hit the notification bell. We drop new cases every single week, and you don't want to miss what's coming.
At age 13, she became obsessed with Ouija boards, and it grew from there. She got into Dungeons and Dragons, and it kept on. She started devouring books on witchcraft, and then finally she said she got to the point where the devil himself educated her.
Polite.
No, sir.
Case 2. Satan's Daughter. Natasha, Cornett, Tennessee, April 1997. They were just passing through. Vidar and Delfina Lillelid, Swedish and Honduran immigrants building a life in America, had stopped at a Tennessee highway rest area with their 6-year-old daughter Tabitha and 2-year-old son Peter. They were coming home from a church event. It was a Sunday afternoon, 19-year-old Natasha Cornett and 5 others were also at that rest stop. The encounter lasted minutes. The damage lasted lifetimes. Who was Natasha Cornett? She grew up in the Appalachian foothills in poverty and instability, and by her late teens, she had built an identity around darkness, calling herself Satan's daughter, surrounding herself with teenagers who were drawn to heavy metal, nihilism, and the thrill of feeling chosen. Cornett had a quality that made her dangerous beyond her own actions. She was charismatic. She could pull people toward her, make them feel special, make them feel like ordinary rules didn't apply to their group. By April 1997, that charisma had pulled 5 others into her orbit. Together, the group had spent days drifting through the South, restless, broke, and increasingly unmoored. The attack. At the rest area, Cornett's group approached the Lillard family. What began as a carjacking escalated with terrifying speed. The Lillards were forced at gunpoint into their own van and driven to a secluded gravel road. There, multiple shots were fired. Vidar, Delphina, and Tabitha were killed. 2-year-old Peter was shot and left for dead, but survived, grievously wounded and orphaned in a single afternoon. The group then fled north in the stolen van. A multi-state police pursuit ended at the Canadian border. Verdict. In court, Natasha Cornett sat largely unmoved as the details of the Lillard murders were read aloud. She expressed continued allegiance to the ideology she had built her identity around, showing little visible recognition that 3 people were dead because of choices made under her leadership. She pleaded guilty, accepting a deal that spared her the death penalty. The sentence: life in prison without parole. Today, Cornett remains incarcerated at the Tennessee Prison for Women. She has been inside for nearly 3 decades. The Lillard and Maylard family came to America looking for something better. They found the worst possible version of what can happen when radicalized thinking meets a moment of random proximity. Peter, the toddler who survived, grew up without his parents, his sister, or the life they were building for him.
The only words anyone could ever offer is, "I'm sorry." Sorry doesn't bring back Sam, nor does it make anybody feel better. Yet in almost 2 years, the only thing I've ever wanted to say is I am sorry.
Case 3. The Experiment. Dakota White, Soperton, Georgia, October 2016. Sam Post didn't come home. At first, his family assumed a simple delay. Sam was dependable, a good student, a loyal friend. But as the hours passed and his phone stayed silent, concern spread through the community of Soperton. Neighbors posted flyers. Friends flooded social media. Police began searching. Then came the confession. And it didn't come from a stranger. Who was Dakota White, 17 years old at the time of the crime? Quiet in school. Withdrawn in a way teachers noticed but couldn't quite name. At home, the picture was more complicated. Reports later described a household shaped by instability, domestic chaos, substance issues, unpredictable tension. White had grown up absorbing a kind of background noise of dysfunction. But what investigators discovered went beyond a difficult childhood. In the days before Sam's disappearance, White had been writing lists, notes, a step-by-step account of how to carry out an attack. He had chosen his victim. He had selected a method. He had thought through the logistics. His motive, as he later described it to detectives, was this. He wanted to know what it felt like to end a life. The night of October 14th, Sam received a text from Dakota, an invitation to come over, play video games, a normal evening between friends. When Sam arrived, White attacked him, stabbed and strangled him with what investigators described as deliberate, sustained force. Afterward, he hid the body in a wooded area outside of town, went home, showered and slept. The next morning, he joined the community search for his missing friend. The confession. When detectives confronted him, Dakota White didn't deny it. He confessed. He led investigators to the body. In his account, He spoke about the planning with something close to detachment, focused on his own experience of the act rather than on the person he had killed. He offered no apology to Sam's family. He didn't weep. He didn't ask for forgiveness. The prosecution would later argue that this wasn't someone who had snapped under pressure. This was someone who had treated another human being as a subject of personal research. Verdict. In 2018, Dakota White was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The Georgia Supreme Court upheld the sentence on appeal in 2020. He will spend the rest of his life in a Georgia State Correctional Facility. Sam Poss had a quick smile, a bright future, and the misfortune of being trusted by the wrong person. His family has carried the weight of that trust ever since. You're watching Truth and Evidence Crime Cases. If this content stays with you, share it with someone. Subscribe if you haven't already. Every case we cover represents a real person, a real family, and a community still looking for answers.
You took our child away. Unlike you, Melissa loved people, always wanting to help others.
Case 4. The Chase. Travon Smith, Macomb County, Michigan, August 2023. It started as a routine traffic stop. An officer attempted to pull over 18-year-old Travon D'Angelo Smith. Smith had been stopped before. He had fled before. And on that August afternoon in Macomb County, he made the same choice again, flooring the accelerator and weaving into traffic with one goal: escape at any cost. That cost would be paid by someone else entirely. The collision. As Smith ran the red lights and cut through intersections, his vehicle reached a crowded crossing and collided at full speed with a car carrying Faith Ajima, a young woman in the final trimester of her pregnancy. The impact was catastrophic. Faith and her unborn child were killed instantly. Smith's car came to rest nearby, smoking and battered. He was apprehended at the scene, injured and in shock. Emergency crews worked the wreckage. There was nothing to be done. 2 funerals. The Agema family had been preparing for a birth. A nursery had been painted. Ultrasound photos had been shared. A name had been chosen. Instead, they planned 2 funerals. In the days that followed, the community processed what had happened and who had caused it. Smith's history became public. A pattern of flight, minor escalating offenses. A young man who had consistently chosen himself over accountability. Prosecutors argued that this was the logical endpoint of that pattern. Not a split-second accident, but the predictable result of years of disregard for others. Verdict. Throughout the trial, Smith remained largely detached. When given the opportunity to address the court, he offered no meaningful acknowledgement of what he had taken. The judge spoke directly to him. Through your choices, he said, you wiped out a family, a mother, an unborn child, a future that will never exist. The sentence, 25 to 50 years on second-degree charges. For the Agema family, the verdict brought structure to their grief, but no resolution to it. Faith's memory remains undimmed. A woman on the edge of a new chapter, taken by someone who chose speed over other people's lives. Smith sits in a Michigan state facility. The family he destroyed has no such structure. Their loss is permanent. Case 5. The House with No Survivors. Joseph Spencer, West Virginia, September 2012. Police responded to a 911 call at a modest rural home in West Virginia. Inside, they found Frederick Spencer, his wife Dixie, and their daughter, Patience. All 3 shot, none of them alive. The person who called it in was their son, 16-year-old Joseph Spencer. He was still there when officers arrived. He made no attempt to leave. What investigators found, Joseph had no criminal record, no documented history of instability, no prior involvement with law enforcement. To neighbors, the Spencers had been an unremarkable rural family. Hard-working, private, maybe carrying some weight the community wasn't aware of, but never dangerous. That's what made the scene so difficult to process. The evidence pointed to a methodical attack. Each victim had been shot individually. No signs of panic, no burst of rage followed by regret. The forensics described something deliberate, a sequence rather than an explosion. Investigators concluded that the motive stemmed from ongoing family disputes, but even those closest to the Spencers couldn't identify a specific argument that had escalated, a threat that had been made, a moment anyone would have flagged. In the courtroom, Joseph Spencer pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder. Throughout the proceedings, witnesses described him as emotionless. No tears, no apologies, no visible reckoning with the reality that he had killed his entire family. The judge noted the absence of any mitigating circumstances. No family members left to offer context. No history of diagnosed illness that had gone untreated. No clear explanation that could bend the facts toward something more comprehensible. 3 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. Joseph Spencer will die inside a West Virginia correctional facility. The house he grew up in became a place the community drove past without stopping. There are no Spencers left to remember it as home. Case 6. The BET. Joshua Davies, Aberconade, Wales, October 2010. Rebecca Aylward was 16 years old, optimistic, well-liked, and completely unprepared for what was coming. Her former boyfriend, Joshua Davies, was also 16. And in the weeks following their breakup, something had shifted inside him, something visible to the friends around him, though not visible enough for anyone to act on. He had begun making comments about Rebecca. Hostile. Escalating. The kind of remarks people told themselves were just teenage bravado. They weren't. The bet. Among a group of friends, a wager was made. Passed around in text messages, casually, almost as a joke. The prize was a breakfast meal. The condition, that Davies follow through on the threats he had been making about Rebecca. It was the kind of dare that should have been impossible to take seriously. Davies took it seriously. The day Rebecca disappeared, he contacted her and said he wanted to reconcile, that maybe there was still something between them. Rebecca agreed to meet. She left home that morning believing she was spending the day with someone she once cared about. Instead, Davies led her into a wooded area outside Aberconade, where he used a heavy rock to end her life. He then walked back to his friends and spent the afternoon making conversation. No visible distress, no change in behavior. Rebecca's family reported her missing that evening. The digital trail. Investigators recovered the text message chain within days. The planning. The wager. The casual back and forth between teenagers who had treated a murder threat as social currency. When confronted, Davies denied involvement. The forensic evidence placed him at the scene. His friends, faced with the weight of the investigation, told investigators what they knew. Verdict and confession, years later. Davies was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 14 years. For years after his conviction, he continued to deny the killing, even as Rebecca's family rebuilt their lives around her absence. It wasn't until 2018 that he finally confessed, admitting what everyone had known since the text messages were read in court. As of 2025, the question of parole remains unresolved. Rebecca's mother has been vocal, public, and consistent in her opposition to any early release. Rebecca's classmates graduated, built careers, started families. They carried her absence through every milestone. Joshua Davies ate breakfast the morning after he killed her. Case 7. The Workplace. Jakari Childs, Cobb County, Georgia, 2023. Jacob Miller was finishing his shift. An IHOP restaurant in suburban Georgia, the kind of first job where teenagers learn how to show up, work hard, and take responsibility. Jacob was exactly that kind of teenager. Part-time hours to help support his family, plans for the future, a reputation among coworkers as someone who showed up and stayed focused. That afternoon, an argument broke out near the kitchen. A few angry words between Jacob and his coworker Jakari Childs. A dispute with roots in a personal relationship that had broken down. No one anticipated what Childs did next. The shooting. Childs drew a handgun and shot Jacob Miller in front of coworkers and customers. There was no window for de-escalation. No time for anyone to intervene. One moment there was an argument. The next, a 16-year-old was dead on the floor of a restaurant. Childs made no attempt to flee. He remained at the scene while witnesses scrambled for cover or stood frozen in shock, processing what they had just seen. The restaurant never felt the same again. Co-workers spoke later about the empty chair in the break room, the anxiety that followed them back to work, the silence where laughter used to be. Verdict. The evidence was immediate and comprehensive. Eyewitnesses, surveillance footage, the weapon itself. The only question was degree. In June 2025, a jury found Childs guilty on all major charges. During sentencing in July, Jacob's family described him as a dedicated worker, a loyal son, a young man with plans. They described a hole that couldn't be filled. The judge sentenced Childs to life with the possibility of parole. Jacob Miller came to work on an ordinary afternoon and never came home. Jakari Childs now serves his sentence in a Georgia state facility, the same state where Jacob's family continues to grieve him. Case 8. The Coordinated Attack. Robert Robinson, Marion County, Florida, Spring 2023. 3 teenagers. 3 separate acts of violence. A single coordinated plan. In the spring of 2023, Marion County became the site of an investigation that would take law enforcement across multiple agencies, weeks of manhunt-level pressure, and a courtroom reckoning that laid bare what organized youth violence looks like at its most deliberate. Layla Silvernail, Camille Quarles, Michael Hodo, all teenagers, all known to their killers, all targeted. Who was Robert Robinson? Robinson was still a teenager when he became part of the chain of events leading to the triple homicide. His background mirrored that of his co-defendants: exposure to gang culture from an early age, normalization of violence, and a peer network in which loyalty and status had replaced ordinary moral reasoning. This was a world where the usual limits, empathy, caution, the basic instinct towards self-preservation, had been systematically eroded. What remained was a transactional logic: do what the group needs, earn what the group offers, eliminate anyone who poses a threat to that structure. The night of the murders, the plan, as prosecutors later described it, was a coordinated robbery, with no intention of leaving witnesses behind. Layla, Camille, and Michael were lured under false pretenses. The attacks that followed were swift and execution style. Each victim was shot. There was no hesitation in the forensic record, no moment where a line was almost crossed but wasn't. Every detail, the location, the weapons, the sequence, pointed to planning, not impulse, not a moment that got out of hand. The investigation, law enforcement mobilized quickly. Local, state, and federal agencies coordinated around a group known to be armed, organized, and aware they were being hunted. Robinson's arrest ended the immediate threat. But for Layla, Camille, and Michael's families, the arrest was only the beginning of a process that couldn't give them back what had been taken. Verdict. In court, the families described not just loss, but the manner of the loss. Execution style, methodical, without mercy or hesitation. The way their children died was almost as difficult to absorb as the fact that they were gone. Robinson, like his co-defendants, showed no visible remorse throughout the proceedings. In July 2025, he entered a plea of no contest and accepted a life sentence without the possibility of parole, identical to those handed down to the others involved. The court's message was intentional. Every participant bore the full weight of what was done. Layla, Camille, and Michael were teenagers who trusted people they knew. That trust was weaponized. Robert Robinson will spend every remaining day of his life in a Florida state facility, the consequence of a culture that had replaced empathy with calculation. Thank you for watching Truth and Evidence Crime Cases. If you've made it this far, you care about these stories, and so do we. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video. Every view tells the algorithm these cases matter. These victims deserve to be remembered. Closing. 8 cases. 8 communities, 8 sets of families still carrying what was done to them. These stories don't have a single thread running through them. No shared motive, no common profile, no formula that explains why these particular people did these particular things. What they share is something simpler and harder to sit with. In every case, the threat was already familiar, already present, already trusted. That's not an argument for suspicion. It's an argument for attention, for the conversations we put off, for the warning signs we explain away, for the moments when something feels wrong and we tell ourselves it probably isn't. It usually isn't, but sometimes it is. These victims couldn't have known. Most of us can't know. But the families left behind have asked us to remember not just the violence, but the people it was done to. Vidar, Delphina, and Tabitha Lillilid. Sam Poss, Faith Agima, Frederick, Dixie and Patience Spencer. Rebecca Aylward, Jacob Miller, Layla Silvernail, Camille Quarles, and Michael Hodo. Their names outlast the headlines. I'm your host. This has been Truth and Evidence, Crime Cases. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this if it stayed with you. And leave a comment. Which of these cases hit you hardest? We'll see you on the next one.